Welcome to the ThreatCast. The ThreatCast is a general cybersecurity podcast discussing topics related to cybersecurity and general cybersecurity things. Today we will be talking about ransomware. We'll be talking more likely about hospital ransomware that occurred over the past 2 weeks. And joining me today will be Adam Blake.
Hello, this is Adam.
Mark Grosso.
Hello, this is Mark.
And I didn't introduce myself, but I am Paul Huddlemeyer. And normally, hopefully, we will have Rob Ogerek on this podcast, but this week he decided not to join us. So maybe another time. So let's just jump in. Let's talk about hospital ransomware. So I originally was going to call this CryptoLocker, and that is a mistake because CryptoLocker is no longer really a thing. CryptoLocker is a form of ransomware, but at the hospital that we were about to talk about, it is not known what type of ransomware was actually on there, but it was a form of a locker. So essentially what happened was a couple weeks ago, the Hollywood Presbyterian Medical Center in Los Angeles had several machines offline for over a week, and this was because they had ransomware on the machines. And these machines were either lab machines, pharmaceutical machines, or even emergency-related machines, which you can't really have offline. So the problem here is they weren't ready to handle it. They didn't know how to handle it. So what the hackers wanted was 9,000 bitcoins. So that's about $3 million. That is not something they could have paid. So they started to get I think it was the FBI involved, and eventually they settled on 40 bitcoins for the hackers. So that's about $17,000. So overall, they did not wait it out. They did not figure out how to break the encryption, because usually you cannot. But it leaves an interesting question. So do you pay? Do you fix it beforehand, which hindsight is great, or do you figure out a way to get around it, or do you just ignore it? But thinking about like a hospital, you can't ignore it. So let's throw this out there. Let's start with Adam Blake. What is your thought?
So for me, the number one thing is, why were they targeted? They were likely targeted because with Hollywood in the name, they're more likely to have more money and more sensitive clients, especially if the hackers were not in U.S. born and just look for the name recognition. Now the issue here is they're not going to have much IT budget to certainly go against this level of attack, and assume that they were small enough fish that they'd be safe. So I'm sure they have a gold image and they have all the basic hygiene. But if any organization is going to be targeted, everyone can fall, and it probably takes very little effort to take down the average small to medium-sized healthcare institution. So the question, sure.
Yep. So actually, I just want to jump in really quick. According to the HPMC president, CEO, his name is Alan Stefanik, he told the local news that, quote, "it was clearly not a malicious attack and just a random attack." So according to the CEO, he believed it was not a targeted attack. So if he does have inside knowledge, so like if the law enforcement that they were actually working with figured out the threat factor, then they could see if it was just a drive-by, right? And I think this is pretty common with ransomware, is they just dump it out there. Someone comes by, they pick it up, they get infected, and then the hacker's like, "Ooh, I got a bite," and then they go from there. And this just happens to be A, high profile, and B, if you get a hospital, you're more likely to be like, well, they're not going to just wipe the machine. So I think it's interesting. Maybe they're just covering themselves, right? It could very well be targeted. They're never going to come out and say that. So
right. Yeah, so if it was targeted, they're never going to say it. And the fact that he says that it wasn't intended to be malicious, or, it wasn't coming for us, it could happen for anyone, is covering himself, rather than him actually having keen insights or the FBI knowing exactly who these people are. It's like there's no way to figure out the motive of the attacker when you can't even figure out what they attacked you with.
Right.
Yeah, that's a good point. So we don't know, or nobody came out and said what the attack vector is. Is that correct?
No.
So nobody knows whether it was the drive-by or phishing or anything like that?
No.
Okay. So that leaves a big question of, whether they don't have the funds for, an IT or a SOC or anything like that. But do you think, being a small hospital, if they don't think they were going to be targeted ever, do you think it's the people that, don't know what to look out for also? Because, I mean, if a lot of these, hospital workers just, aren't very tech savvy, so to speak, do you think they're just going to click everything if it was a phishing attack or, browse to whatever?
We all see that.
Sure. So, and there's a lot to be said for the education of the workers. But at the end of the day, they don't make their money using IT, but they were forced to put all the records online, which is why they are primed for attack. Even if it was a drive-by and it wasn't targeted, then the hackers, as soon as they realize what they got, know that, number one, the company's not going to want this to be public. Number two, they absolutely have to get their data back. And number three, they know the value of the data, since there's so many regulations like HIPAA that says you have to put records online, and there's a small amount in the law that say, or the regulation, that say it has to be protected X, Y, and Z. And then, of course, there's audits to go around that, but that is basic level protection that isn't going to stand up to any scrutiny from an adversary. So, yes, we can say that they should have protected themselves, and I'm sure they would agree, and they're going to hire an amount of incident response to go in just to cover themselves. But the issue is bigger than this one company, to me. The issue is, if we're going to regulate the fact that they have to digitize all of their records, what stops the company from down the street from getting attacked in the same way? And I don't blame them at all for paying the ransom.
So Symantec last year put out a white paper that said that every year about $5 million is paid out to ransomware. So if you pay out, you're going to inspire copycat attacks. If you don't pay out, it could be a deterrent, because these hackers are paying upwards of $6,000 for a specific locker type of malware, and if it's not successful, well, that was a huge waste of money. So it's interesting, because you're on the news, or you're going to be out a lot of money, but at the same time, like, what is the value of your data? And if you're thinking, what is the value of your data? You have hospitals, you have banks, you have government agencies. Their data is very high. They need to be sensitive. It's just it's interesting that this isn't more common. And if it is more common, I'd like to know what their remediation is, because logging and backups are going to be the most important part here. But I don't think that's going to help, especially in like government agencies.
Yeah. So if the U.S. government can't protect their own data with seemingly endless resources, and banks still get attacked successfully with significant resources as well, I don't know how small to mid-sized companies that aren't specialists in technology are expected to maintain the same standard. They're obviously going to be the low-hanging fruit and the target, because when the extortion came in for the millions of dollars, they thought that the organization would pay it back. Maybe that was their first attack and they wanted to aim high and settle low. But with a name of Hollywood, you would expect them to have money. So they knew who they were talking to, assumedly.
So you think they just doubled down? They're like, oh, crap, this is Hollywood Presbyterian Medical Center. Even if this guy's in Russian, he might understand what Hollywood is. And he's like, all right, just give me all your money. So, 9,000 Bitcoins.
Right.
And then finally he's like, or alternatively, this is probably how it starts out all the time, where it's like, give me every single dollar you have, and then it's like, all right, let's go a little bit lower, something a little more realistic. So they'll be like, okay, I'll pay that.
Sure, this is wild speculation, obviously.
Of course.
But when we take into the great movie by Sir Liam Neeson, no one is kidnapping a child of a poor family, right? If you do, then you say, okay, give me $300, because you assume that they're going to pay as much as they can, but asking them for $1 million isn't productive.
So that brings up an interesting point, because one of the articles I took a look at says a police station got hit by basically the crypto locker, and they paid $300 to unlock the files. So, I mean, do you think that,
What's your price?
well, it's
What's
that, but do you also think that even though it still had Hollywood, do you think they were still a target for that? Even though, or do you think it was still like, a drive-by? Do you think it could have been just a blanket phishing email that went out to hundreds of thousands of people and, because your work emails and everybody's work emails are all on their LinkedIn. So people can go browse LinkedIn, find your work email, and just, blanket out a whole bunch of phishing attacks and then see what sticks.
I think it's almost irrelevant to think about that because it's regardless. Like if it truly was sophisticated than just using a locker, but because like lockers are so loud that if you have decent AV or a decent intrusion detection system or something, it's going to pick it up. It's going to get picked up. So it is speculation at this point.
Right. Either they didn't have a decent antivirus, or they don't have the basic hygiene because they didn't know that it was a priority, or this is a more sophisticated attack. I tend to think that it was probably the hygiene issue. It is they don't keep it up to date, they don't have full coverage, they don't encrypt it when it's stored in the data at rest. Like, that's obviously wild speculation, but how many organizations do you think know basic hygiene? They probably have 3 IT guys and a CISO who manages all 3.
Okay, so let's think about remediation, and I'm not really talking about remediating CryptoLocker because at a point you kind of can't. I'm thinking of how you can prevent something like this from happening, and I don't like spouting out the same thing every single time, right? So your AV, make sure you have logging enabled. Make sure you have your phishing training and stuff like that. But I don't think this is really something you can solve. Like even if you have backups, let's say you have backups. Let's say they have the capability to even perform backups for some of these medical machines. What do they do with that? I feel like by the time they realize what has happened, they're backing up the locked malware. They're backing up stuff that isn't going to help them anyway. And I feel like their detection is probably real weak. So what's even the point of doing backups for them?
Cool. The point of backups is at some point you're going to get to a place where it doesn't execute itself. And a decent IR person, decent malware person will be able to go in and say the difference between this image and this image is these files were modified and these processes are now running if they execute or they deploy them into like a virtual machine, for example. And the backup should just be the secure files itself, not necessarily the entire OS.
Okay, yes.
Which is assuming where it's lurking. So
okay.
Assuming they're doing backup properly, then it is this one folder on a shared drive or these series of folders on a shared drive. And at that point, you can go to yesterday and start with a new system.
Okay. All right. Yeah.
So Adam, are you suggesting having backups of everybody's files that they're using onto like a server share? What exactly are you talking here?
So in theory, they should have a backup of system files, right? So anything that is important to the organization backed up once a day, let's say. And then they have their critical files, which is your encrypted data at rest, that's going to be stored off-site somewhere. So there's not a single point of failure. If the hospital floods, they don't lose all their data.
Okay, that's that's what I was getting at. Okay.
Sure, so put it on tape and send it to something like Iron Mountain that will store it until you call them and say bring it all back.
So, okay, so I get it, okay? I get backups, and I get that if you back up enough data, you're going to get to a point where you can fix it. But what's the problem here? Like, what is the problem that we will be facing, that these companies will be facing in the future? They don't have enough money to have a dedicated security staff.
And there's also not the visibility into it, right? So it is the argument for the RIA saying we're going to make an example of this one person who's pirating, right? everyone looks at Ashley Madison, they look at these major breaches, and they say, oh, well, that's not going to be our organization. We're going to, put another $50,000 into our IT budget. But they may not be looking at the right things. They probably don't have the right people hired. And there's not an incentive model because IT in most organizations is the loss leader. It just cuts straight into profit, and you don't see any return on investment until you're breached, in which case everyone says they should have spent more.
Okay, so you think taking that 17,000 risk is way worth it?
My argument is that there should be some organization that is a conglomerate of companies that face the same risks. So whether it is, Southern California hospital chains all have the same practices and they store their backups in the same place and they pay a subcontractor security firm to secure all their data and do basic maintenance instead of having an in-house IT system, that might make sense. At a larger scale, you might bring in an organization to do health maintenance once a year for checkups instead of having 10 full-time IT staff who are sitting around waiting for something to happen. Depending on the size of the organization and the wealth of the organization, this is going to vary widely in the sensitivity of the information getting out. But we can't expect every organization to have a fully staffed, operational, and efficient IT system.
It's impossible.
Yeah, so I mean, my big thing is this: paying out the $17,000. I mean, the data they have is very sensitive, so they need it back, right? I mean, it's customer data, it's social security numbers, it's medical records, everything like that. Now, my big problem is it's really just the Band-Aid to fix the issue current right now. So what's to say that, the bad guys had their ransomware in there, in their system, took over workstations, took over servers. What's to say that they're actually out and they're not planning on doing it again, right? So exactly, yeah. So I mean, they'll come back. They'll know that
that's the thing.
This company, they know this company paid. They know they can get money from it. Maybe they'll come back with a different attack vector. We don't know what it is right now, but maybe if it was drive-by download, it'll be phishing next time, or more social engineering. Just face-to-face with somebody handing off USBs or anything like that. Yeah. So I mean, go ahead.
I seriously doubt that this organization, they would have paid the 17 immediately. If the hackers didn't come in and say 9 million or whatever it was, then this would have been swept under the rug. They would have paid the 17, brought in a small IR force, and pat themselves on the back for being so responsive. That's how this often goes. Otherwise, there's not an industry for this type of attack. The fact that they came in for the astronomical sum that the organization wasn't willing to pay or was unable to pay is the only reason why this made the news and FBI was engaged.
So, I mean, 20 years ago to worm, today it's ransomware. 10 years from now, it's going to be something else, right? You're always going to be playing catch up. You're always going to be getting caught.
Yeah, so let me ask now, if this would happen to your stuff, guys, what would you do? Would you pay to have your own data unlocked, or would you just...
I would not pay.
Take the loss, and because I know personally people who have paid to get their data back just because they don't understand what they're doing.
Yeah,
I would absolutely pay to get my phone data back.
Would you?
A reasonable amount, and for anyone who is going to attack me, that amount is $5.
Okay, so let's take this scenario, Adam. You have your phone. None of it is backed up on the cloud. No photos, no apps. Every single thing that you use in your phone is on your phone. And if you lose that phone, if it gets locked up, you're not getting it back. Would you pay $1,000?
No, because I don't have the cash on hand. But $500 and we start talking, right? If it's something to the point where going through and recreating all my contacts, finding all the pictures that I didn't download to anything else.
That's a lot of time.
It's a ton of time.
I mean, you don't have that many friends, Adam.
What's your time?
Let's be real.
You're not wrong, but the ones that I have are terrible. So,
well, you're not wrong there.
Hey.
So the issue runs in that I think the vast majority of people, especially, and I consider myself fairly tech savvy. If you attack an older couple and you say, we have your data, we were locked it away, and we have access to it, pay us $500 to get it back, I would say a vast majority would pay because, number one, they think you have their data, and they don't know exactly what's on it, but they know that's bad. And they just want you to go away.
That's an interesting point, though. Now,
fake AV.
Go ahead, Paul.
Yeah. So 5 to 7 years ago, fake AV was really hot. So you download an antivirus program. It looks like a really crappy version of an antivirus program, and it says you have viruses on your machine. It was super fake, but you know how much money they made off that just because of people that weren't aware of it? They're just like, well, I have a lot of viruses, and I need to buy this tool in order to clean it up when there's nothing actually on there except the program itself. So it doesn't have to be encrypting your files. It can be something as basic as saying, give me money. Because if they're scared, it doesn't have to be super technical. They're going to give money.
Yeah. Now, Adam, hold on.
Yep.
So you brought up a good point where you mentioned that if an elderly couple gets hit by this and they think that someone has their data and they need it back. Now, do you think in the hospital case any data was actually exfilled, or do you think it was just strictly encrypted at rest with the bad guy's encryption, or do you think everything was just sent out the door?
I think that it's probably just encrypted at rest. If I were an attacker and I found this, then you need to prove the fact that you have access to it, and you release a small amount of that onto the internet, certainly not the dark web, because that's not a thing, and you release a small amount as a proof of I have your data, that would have been publicized.
Yeah,
because
that's
where the ransom is, right? So if you say I have your data, that cost goes up exponentially because everyone who's ever been to that hospital is now worried to go back to your hospital because they could have lost all their data.
Well, don't you think people are going to be worried anyway?
Oh, absolutely.
So people, their name is tainted at this point, right? So.
Right, but you run into the Ashley Madison issue of as soon as the leaks happen, it gets beyond something happened and you need to reset your passwords, and it becomes my wife is now going to search on this live leak to figure out if I'm on Ashley Madison.
That's a good point. Good point.
I try.
It's never going to end. So, I'm interested to know what other people think. I want to know, do you think, what your theories are on how this hospital got it? Was it just a drive-by? Likely. Social engineering? Maybe. I don't know. But I would like to hear what you think about our comments, what you think of any resolutions, how you think you could fix this. Could you fix it without paying? Is there a way you can get past the encryption? Probably not. So leave your comments. Let us know, and we'll get back to you next time with another edition of the ThreatCast.